Jeff Salzman here, and welcome to the Daily Evolver Live here on Integral Live, a division of Integral Life, which is produced by Corey DeVos, who is sitting here with me, actually sitting in his house with us. Morning, Corey.
Good morning, Jeff.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited for another week of Daily Evolver.
Yeah, me too. So today's Monday, October 23rd, 2017. And I think for most of us in the States, it's voting season. It's not, the odd numbered or even numbered elections, but for a lot of us, it's very important elections, some special elections for the national, but for a lot of us, it's the local elections that really matter. And there's a big election pending here in the I think November 7th in Boulder. And, the battle lines are drawn. And that's, of course, true in the national scene, too. And so I often get questions. What is the integral position on various policies? And I got a question from one of my listeners, Ryan from Hawaii, and I think he put it really well. He says, "Hey, Jeff, I'm wondering if you could sometime go through a list of your policy positions informed from an integral position. For example, what would be the integral perspective on universal health care, universal basic income, US foreign policy, immigration, minimum wage, etc.? I haven't seen much concrete stances on issues from the integral community and am interested in your take. Aloha." So aloha to you, Ryan. And I think it's really a great question, and it's actually one I struggle with. I'm not sure I have a particularly great answer, but I'll give it a stab here. I think one of the most important things to realize as we work on entering integral consciousness is that we can see the evolution of humanity, of human consciousness and human culture. And that evolution has millennia by millennia, century by century, relentlessly had larger and larger groups of people and larger percentages of people living more materially wealthy, decent, and peaceful lives. And that is a trend that is just indelibly stamped in our history. And we can see that now because we can see history. We can see it so well. So the world continues to make that kind of progress. The country continues to make that kind of progress. And, of course, the pendulum swings and we lurch forward and we go backward. But I always, I was never satisfied with the mere pendulum. And I realized that, okay, the pendulum swings, but the clock itself moves. And we want that to continue. And from an integral perspective, we can take some faith that it will continue. And so, yes, the sacred world is coming. And I know I often say that. But I really think that I'm not sure it's much more than 100 years away when I think about the acceleration of consciousness and culture and the acceleration of consciousness, of evolution. And I do think that as we move into that world, we will see that, yes, universal health care will be a basic right. 60% of the American people see that as a basic right now, which is an all-time high. Foreign policy will basically be peace and prosperity for all. Trade, free flow of people, money, goods, ideas, help for each other. Universal basic income, yes, I think so. I think that clearly what we will see is that our material needs will be easily met. We can actually do that now. Making material wealth, we've got that down. The challenges currently are distributing that so that there aren't people who are sick with affluence and people who are sick with deprivation. And then, of course, the other thing is to create this wealth in a way that is sustainable. You know, orange modernity has a growth mentality, profit, greed, you might say. And the green postmodern sensibility is for sustainability. So we're working from one to the next. You can see that actually happening. And if I think about immigration in the sacred world to come, there will be a free flow of people. Just like in America, you're free to live wherever you want in America if you're a citizen. And at some point, that will be true of the world, and if you're a citizen of the world. And we'll all be multicultural, and we'll all be, you know, a little less white and a little more brown. And it's all, you know, just the natural, we can see that happening. And there's no reason that those walls won't continue to come a-tumbling down. The rub, of course, is how do we get there? And how do we get there, particularly taking our current polarized situation in our culture and politics? How do we do that, considering that reality? And as integralists, we want to be able to expand to include that polarity, to include both sides of the polarity, not equivocate or equalize them or explain one away using the other, but to see that both of these, the left and the right, actually have a vision for a better world. They're both working on creating a better world for their grandchildren. And that right there calls forth a relaxation of sort of that enemy other that we find ourselves fighting. And we can see, you know, what is the piece of the truth that both of these sides have. And just, you know, in simple sort of energetics, conservatives like a sort of private freedom. They're suspicious of the government. They tend to be pro-free enterprise. In the left, it's the opposite. Progressives like progress through government, suspicious of private enterprise. You know, I often say that if we want to understand why the right is so allergic to government, you know, and what animates groups like the Tea Party, just think about how you feel when you think about Monsanto. You know, it's the same kind of thing. There's this malevolent force that is at work, and they have to fight it. And I often think it's because traditionalists who tend to be on the right, who tend to be conservatives, are literally closer. Their world space is literally closer to that theocratic, autocratic, you know, monarch stage of development where people were indeed victims of their government, at the mercy of, they were subject to the government. So we want to hold that as we, you know, feel our generally liberal vibe in the integral community. And most integralists are liberal because most integralists are coming out of a mature modernity or, you know, the green post-modernity. And, you know, there's just a natural movement towards world centrism, to multiculturalism. We get interested in other people, not afraid of them. We understand that there has to be a collective power of government, that private power and public power are sort of independent or indispensable polarities, you know. We tend to be allergic to nationalism and, you know, anything like that tries to limit what's good, you know, limit the idea of moral consideration. But at some point, we, you know, sort of get bored with just the liberal thing because it doesn't feel like it's enough. And that's a natural move. If you look at human evolution, all of human evolution is about transcending some limited identity in favor of a larger identity that includes more. So at some point, we grow beyond our identification with our family and our clan and our race and our nation. And we can see this as we look at the history of humanity. And then the final thing that we have to give up, or we want to give up because we get bored being constricted by it, is our ideology. And that's interesting because, you know, what does it mean to be post-ideological? Where I can actually, if I think of left and right, I can hold both of them. I can see what's the upside of each. I can see what is the downside of each. And, you know, I don't think it's necessarily post-ideological as it is trans-ideological, in the sense that we can just naturally take all ideologies into account. And so if we look at something like healthcare, for instance, we can see that, yes, we're going to be moving towards an ever, just as we have been in this country since, you know, the New Deal by Roosevelt in the 60s and Medicare, that we're going to be stumbling forward in a way that includes more people and takes care of more people. And that's going to continue. And is it going to continue in the way that it did with Medicare, where we have a bipartisan bill for that? Or is it going to be where the Democrats do their thing, and then the Republicans come in and do their thing, and we sort of do this experimentation instead of analysis, and things stumble forward in that way? I mean, we're seeing that in the healthcare debate right now. Is it going to be possible for the Republicans to take the pre-existing condition clause away? No, most Republicans don't think so. That is sort of baked into the cake. Now, if they do, we'll see what kind of a backlash forms. And, you know, we just never know how these things are going to work. Now, that doesn't mean that if my life or somebody I love's life depends on healthcare, that I'm not going to fight tooth and nail to see that it stays. And I think that as integralists, we can hold the bigger perspective, but we still have to get into these binary battles between this side or that side. Which slate are you going to vote for? And we want to fight. We become friendlier to the whole fight. We don't demonize the enemy, but we still fight. And actually dropping that sort of victimization, fear, demonization, and breathing in, you know, a bigger space that contains all, allows us to fight more effectively and more fiercely, I think. And also to just bring a certain peace, more peace and equanimity to the situation. I always think of the, you know, good old proverb about the Chinese farmer, and I know you probably heard it, but I'll say it briefly. So there's the Chinese farmer, and the Chinese farmer has a son. And the Chinese farmer has a couple horses. So one day, the horses run off. And everybody says, oh, how sad it is that your horses ran off. And the Chinese farmer says, well, maybe yes, maybe no. And so the next day, the horses come back and they have two mares. So all of a sudden he has four horses. So everybody goes, hey, you have great, you have four horses now. And the farmer says, yeah, maybe yes, maybe no. So the next day, as the farmer's son is trying to tame one of the new horses, he's thrown off and he breaks his leg. And everybody says, how sad, your son broke his leg. And the farmer says, maybe yes, maybe no, because you get it. Next day, the army comes and they're conscripting all of the healthy young men to take them off to battle and probable death. And his son is spared. So, you know, the beat goes on. And as integralists, we can sort of trust that we don't exactly know what is the right thing. I think we become far more humble about our opinions. But we can trust that things continue to, in the longer term, you know, from a 30,000 foot view, get better. And if you don't see evolution, then you see what we see all around us, which are people who are just completely gripped by these political issues. And because, you know, it's, you know, when you win, you win, when you lose, you lose. And it's sort of a steady state environment. And, you know, there's no bigger arc to history that's going on. And I think we can let that go and be even more effective. So here's how some of that has helped me. And here's some of the ways I've changed that I would actually attribute to being more of an integral thinker than a postmodernist thinker. At least this is how my integral thinking helps to, you know, true up and my postmodern thinking, if you will. For one thing, I'm actually more redistributive. I do think that there is a case to be made that as the means of production continue to get more efficient, that the ownership of those cannot just continue to stay in the hands of the people who built them. And if you remember, back in the second election of Obama, he said something about, somebody was talking about they built their business, and Obama said, well, yeah, you built your business, but what you didn't build are the roads and the army who protects you and the courts that adjudicate your contracts and this whole system of the lower right quadrant of America. You didn't build that. And of course, that was so horrifying that he said, you didn't build that. And so that became a rallying cry for the right, but Obama was right. There is a public sector that I don't know exactly how it's going to grow, because, you know, I have enough of appreciation for the right wing, if you will, or the conservative side of the street, to know that unchecked government is not a good thing too. And that there actually is such a thing as a deep state. I mean, that's a sort of a pejorative word, but they're career people in the government all over the place. And they generally are liberals. And they are, like any organization that isn't checked, they tend to get self-perpetuating and you know, find things to do and become more important. And what they're doing becomes the most important thing in the world. Just like for me, integral is, you know, it's my one hammer, and that has to be checked. So, you know, I appreciate that too. I'm less of a globalist than I used to be. When I see these hollowed out cities back home where I come from, I realize that, you know, I'm sympathetic with Steve Bannon and the Breitbart people, that the middle class was sold out by the globalists who wanted to make more profit. At the same time, a little less tolerant of free riders. When I see people who are very, very good at working the system and, you know, kind of getting benefits that they ought not. And I have a friend who just quit his dentistry practice because he couldn't take it anymore. He has this whole story, and he's, you know, a Trump-hating, dyed-in-the-wool liberal, but he tells the stories of people coming in their Mercedes and demanding, you know, all kinds of care in their, you know, on the Obamacare. I don't know. I'm just saying that there, you know, that we have to fix these things, that everything has its excesses. It's just something that we, you know, we take for granted. That's just going to happen. So it's happening now. I was talking about the election that's happening in Boulder, and you know, the big battle is between the growth people and the no growth people. And here we have an interesting thing, because it's the progressives who are actually the conservatives. They, you know, the progressive impulse is always to make things better, to change things. The conservative impulse is to protect what we have, to conserve what we have. And those are independent polarities, and they both have to be online. Now, right now, they're very polarized, and being very polarized is actually a stage of development. And, there's generally a blow up, a disintegration of a polarity, and it sort of reorganizes itself. And I think we're in the process of that. And we have that. We're so lucky to have the human wrecking ball as our president, because, maybe he'll facilitate some of that if we live through him. But anyway, so, as a Boulderite, I've lived here for most of my life, 38 years. And I know the cartoon character that each side has of the other. And I know how developers can be greedy. I do know that. I've been a developer, or at least I've invested in developments, and my goal in investing was to get a maximum return. That's why people invest. And so that is the overwhelming impulse of developers, is to make money. Now, that's a good thing, but it's only one side of the pole. The other side of the pole are the preservationists. And these are the people who, the development side sees them as wanting to preserve Boulder in amber. That, they got theirs, and they don't want anybody else to get theirs. And so they want Boulder to just stay where it is. And I was out with a friend the other night, and there's this new development in the east side of town. And it used to be a car dealer at a kind of an open lot. And it was just sort of the edge of town. And they've developed it. And it's this little sort of mini downtown area, and condos on top, and a restaurant. And they use the old depot from the train station. And it's, kind of nice. The buildings are kooky and sideways, and everything's slanted, and it's got a young vibe. It's got lots of walking areas, a nice bridge. There's a stream under it. There's still construction. There's still some heavy equipment out there, but we went out for an art opening of a new gallery that was out there. And my friend, she's very much in the preservationist camp. She said she felt that she was at the final scene of Red Desert, the Michael Antonioni movie from, I think, 1964, where they end up in this industrial wasteland. And, my friend, she has a very highly developed aesthetic sense, and I take her seriously when she says that. And I looked around, and I kind of get it. It was nice when that was open negative space. I'm not sure I love the car dealer and all his asphalt, but it's a perspective that I want to actually take seriously and, consider as I'm making my decisions. So, one of the great things about Integral is we don't have to always get it right. We're just doing our best. So what I'm doing is the more I think of it is I'm looking at this big slate of city council people. And, they all have websites. So I'm going and looking at each one of their websites, and I'm going to vote for the one who I think is the ones. You have to vote for, I think, 4. I'm going to vote for the ones who I think are wisest. I'm just going to vote for the wisest people. And these are the people who I'll know it when I see it, but they're generally less angry. They take more into account. And there's a lot of them. These people running are exceptional. I mean, Boulder's very lucky in that way. So it's a worthy project. And as a citizen, I want to work my way there. I want to do that. So that's my responsibility. So, as integralists, we want to, by and large, be, aware of taking the whole spiral of development into account. And we want to take the position of our enemies into account, our political enemies, and not make them our, sworn enemies. And we want to realize that things, we sort of stumble our way forward, we fail our way forward, we fight our way forward, and the other F word, our way forward, in the sense that we, love each other forward. And we see what you got and what I have and how we can get together and what we can do and how we can create we spaces. And we're just doing that like gangbusters right now. Worldwide, it's astonishing. This is the upside of, the tech revolution. We've seen some downsides that were hidden too, and we talk about that in another show because it's interesting. But, That's the bottom line, is we want to vote in a way that is best we could determine, knowing that we're not going to get it right all the time. Vote in a way that moves the ball forward. So that's what I think, and happy to share it. Thanks for listening. So Corey, any thoughts?
Yeah, I've got a bunch of thoughts. Another great episode, Jeff. You really surfaced a lot of really critical considerations here. I think that, I think for me, what in my experience of sort of trying to come at political engagement from an integral point of view, one of the things I noticed is when I was first sort of on-ramping into integral, I came into integral with a lot of idealism, right? And I think a lot of us do, particularly the ones who, come out of sort of that bright green space. We hit integral, and then, we're basically given a new scaffolding to support and to pursue our ideals. But I think that there's a maturation process too, where a more integral point of view begins to square those ideals with a more pragmatic sense of politics as the art of the possible. And even maybe, going a couple steps forward, not just the art of the possible, but it's the art of constellating multiple cosmic addresses. I mean, we're talking about 300 million people, constellating all of those cosmic addresses in order to produce a more positive endgame. And, that's tricky. And, the more people sort of allow their idealistic, views of the perfect becoming the enemy of the good. In other words, our ideals actually get in the way of us creating a better world, because we sort of have a tendency to actually kind of go amber with our ideals. It becomes all or nothing in a certain sense. And I saw this, in a big way in the recent election between, Bernie supporters and Hillary supporters. And, there's another thing I think happens is that pendulum that we see, that we're used to watching sort of swinging in the world. We're sort of looking at the world and watching this pendulum that oftentimes is more like a wrecking ball, right? I mean, it swings over here, they build up a structure, then it swings over, that structure gets destroyed, and we have to start from scratch, and it kind of just happens over and over again. I mean, no wonder why, whereas, sort of cynical as we are, we're it's a lot easier to destroy something than it is to build something.
And I would argue that, when one thing gets destroyed, it doesn't get completely destroyed.
Oh, that's right.
There's sort of a ratcheting forward.
Yeah, well, and sometimes that surface level destruction actually reinforces the deep structure. I think of Obamacare, for example, where, for the past, since Trump's election, they've been, sort of gnawing in on Obamacare, and the effect that it had was it made the ACA as a deep structure more popular than ever.
Absolutely.
Now, that's not to say the surface structures aren't, completely messed up. Of course they are. There's a lot of room for improvement. I mean, any major social program that you introduce, you have the expectation that you're going to spend generations, incrementally improving it. And, and that's sort of how evolution goes, right? It's a slow, incremental process until it's not, until you have those big sort of leaps.
Yeah.
But the thing is, those,
just as an example for what you're talking about, I could see that, even for me, I'm dealing with insurance and what insurance should I have, and it's all so difficult and complicated, and everybody's dealing with this, or many people are dealing with this, and at some point we just sort of get turned off to the whole thing and just want to go to a single payer.
Yeah, that's right.
And, I can see that, the part of the process of moving forward is just getting deeply sick.
Yeah.
What's going on.
Well, that's right. Yeah, because we only have those big shifts in evolution, when we face catastrophe. I mean, that's how evolution works. Lower right quadrant changes and forces us to adapt. It forces us to behave in new ways, to solve problems.
The higher we get, the less catastrophes, the less catastrophic the catastrophes.
That's right.
Yeah. Yep. And that's an important thing, and something, again, that I think we could take faith in. And it's a little bit like going traditional in the sense that I can turn this over to God, actually. I mean, they talk about give your burdens to God.
Right.
And that's how wonderful is that? I don't have
Yeah.
to worry about it. God's handling it.
Right.
And I hear my traditionalist religious friends talking like that, and I think, God, that's nice. And I used to feel that way when I was 11, but I don't anymore. But I can actually have faith in emergence.
Right. Right.
And that takes some of that burden away too.
Right. Well, I think there's even a lot of liberal atheists who are looking at the Trump administration, and their only reaction is, Jesus, take the wheel.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I think that's critical. And, as that pendulum becomes internalized, we start feeling those forces operating within us.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of Ken's, I think, greatest contributions to this conversation is simply noticing that oftentimes the liberals and the conservatives, let's take altitude out of this, right? Let's just assume that, let's say an orange conservative and an orange liberal are looking at a problem. There's a problem that sits in between them. They're both going to have very, very different interpretations of what's causing that problem. Mm-hmm. The conservative is always going to look towards the interior values. It's going to look at, what are your family values? What's your work ethic? What's, what are you doing to empower yourself to overcome this challenge and overcome the suffering? Whereas the liberal will look at the exact same problem and say, well, geez, the system is just clearly stacked against this,
right.
this group or this person or
right.
or what have you. And, we need to level the playing field, and we need more fairness. And so it's, and surprise, the integralist looks at this debate and says, guys, you're both right. Right? You're both, in fact, not only you're both right, you're both wrong. And if either of you are the only ones to come up with the, solution for this problem, you're only going to make it worse because some, critical element is going to get left out.
I often think, thank God for the conservatives who are stopping us liberals from socially engineering us into oblivion.
Absolutely. As a 40-year-old man,
running rampant.
Yeah, exactly. As a 40-year-old man, I feel lucky that in so many ways my ideals, a lot of the ideals I had in my 20s are still intact.
Yeah.
But I'm a little bit more skillful with it. Like my idealistic world, I call myself a Maslow socialist or maybe a Maslow capitalist, where, I sort of render unto Jesus and render unto Caesar in a certain sense where, I believe the lowest rungs of Maslow's hierarchy, food, shelter, safety, all the way up to education, healthcare, all of that should be socialized. That Absolutely. Should be collectivized. And I think that because capitalism doesn't work when it comes to providing houses for all people, providing healthcare for all people. The profit motive is very limited when it comes to solving those problems. But the profit motive is amazing for meeting all those other needs in the hierarchy. Maybe, up to self-actualization. It's, you need
it's
enough
that
money to self-actualize, but
the polarity between safety and freedom, the
Absolutely.
Polarity between cooperation and competition.
Yep.
Those are, both positive polarities, all of those.
That's right.
And we're going to be healthiest when our political system contains both, which it does,
does
in its own sort of weird way. And where we can actually feel both of those in ourselves, in our own mind bodies.
That's right.
And I think, it's like when we have, as I say, trans-ideological, when we contain multiple ideologies, there's a natural wisdom that arises that lets us see what is the, most healthy solution.
That's right.
To the problem, because we're taking more into account.
Yeah. Yeah.
I always love what Krishnamurti said. It always stuck with me. It's real simple. Your ideals are the death of reality. That's good.
Yeah, it is good. That's good.
Your ideals, particularly if you're gripped by any particular set,
right,
is the death of reality.
Well, that's what, and especially if you get too hasty with your idea, if you get too pushy with your ideals, because politics teaches us whenever you make a big move in one direction, you're going to have a backlash in the opposite direction. So that's why this really is an art. You have to thread. You really have to thread 300 million needles in order to get anything done in this country. Mm-hmm. And so what that requires of us is for us to continue taking our ideals, just as seriously as we ever did before, but we need to look at it, from the long view, right? We need to say, okay, this is the world that I know can emerge and probably will emerge. And I'm going to devote my life to helping it emerge. However, also, this is going to take generations, right? And we can sort of, help create some leverage from where we are in our sort of sphere of influence in our current era and all of that. But, at some point, this is going to be our kids' battle as well.
Yeah.
And we need to view it that way. And because otherwise what happens is things move very, very quickly. And yet for an idealist, they're not moving fast enough.
No.
And oftentimes that forces us to disengage with the system. And then we start falling into that lesser of evils. We fall into that both parties are the same. It just, we flatten everything in a very sort of cynical way. And I think, one of the gifts of Integral is it can re-enliven all this. It can re-enliven the debate. It can actually, Integral, I would go so far as to say that, sometimes you're going to vote for the guy who doesn't share your point of view around a particular policy or, doesn't necessarily share your view or your perspective, but is the more skillful candidate to put in there. Maybe because it's opposition, you just have a sense that maybe they're too idealistic and you anticipate a backlash against anything they're going to do. Or, whatever the case might be, Integral becomes less, as you say, less ideological and much more, you become more of a systems physician. You start kind of zooming in on, those pressure points, those acupuncture points in society where we need more leverage.
I mean, I think of John McCain. I was fervently against John McCain in 2008 when Obama was elected, because Obama's my guy. I just felt the Integral vibe from that guy from the moment he burst on the scene with that speech in the previous convention. And so, McCain was the bad guy. Now, okay, McCain is like, I would love for him to be president,
Or
and
Romney,
I would vote for him over a lot of Democrats because he is reached this level of wisdom. And part of it is, I think, because he's facing his mortality. But also, it's just people just continue to grow.
That's right.
We just can't help it.
Yep. We have a question from Maureen.
Oh, cool.
So how do we encourage more integral understanding and discussion around these basic understandings to facilitate more wisdom in politics? I mean, my first advice is keep watching Daily Evolver, because this is exactly what we're trying to do in an ongoing way, is just sort of, not tell you what to think, but maybe help you hold all of this and sort of navigate, the complexity, because this is I think a point that's becoming increasingly important to me is understanding that we're all using the same integral framework. We're all using AQUIL to sort of enact our worlds and to as a lens to filter reality. But my view, the view that I enact using integral, looking at a particular data set, is never going to be the same as what you see, Jeff. So in a sense, integral never can be. It's impossible for integral to become an ideology that says you must think this about this issue and that about that issue and what have you, because we're all going to enact this world in different ways. We're all exposed to different data, and all of us are missing key data that's limiting our enactments of the world. So
and that leads, I mean, if I may, that leads me to what would be my answer to that question, and that is seek to understand.
That's right.
Instead of be understood.
That's right. Yeah.
That turns the political argument on its head. So you're with your sister-in-law, your brother-in-law, whatever it is, and they see it differently. And so you get really curious about that with them.
Yeah.
And that is a great gift to give somebody.
Yeah.
Where you really get curious about them and how they see it and what they're thinking and what, calculations they're doing and what matters to them and why. And you just can't help but get a little bigger.
Yeah. That's right.
They can't either. Everybody leaves bigger.
Yep.
And that's again what integral does. I hear liberals, and God bless the liberals, and I'm still neck deep in it myself. But it's all these. How can we get more skillful at convincing these people they're wrong?
Right. No, that's right.
and it's anyway.
Yeah, it's a smaller tent. You know, they have the self-image of this all-inclusive tent. That's, you know, well, we're all inclusive as long as you're all inclusive too. But if you're not all inclusive, get out of here.
I know. Yeah. I mean, we accept every race, creed, and color as long as they agree with us.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and Jeff, this is another, I think, critical part about how integral wisdom informs this, is that, you know, to transcend and include is simultaneously to negate and preserve, right? So one of my political practices is whenever there's a big story, you know, I'm always on like Reddit, for example. I'll go into the politics subreddit, which is, you know, very liberal leaning. And what I'll do is the first thing I do, I don't even read the top post because I'm not interested in reading commenters who are just going to reinforce sort of the view that I'm walking into the conversation with anyway. So I sort by controversial, right? And I start looking, and there's, you know, I've got sort of lower chakra reasons for doing that and higher chakra reasons, right? The lower chakra of me is like, oh, you know, I just want to know what the idiots are talking about today, or what are, you know, what are the Russian bots up to this morning? But then the higher part of me is like, no, if there's going to be a reasonable disagreement here, this is where I'm going to find it, because these subreddits are just as much of, you know, sort of as much of a bubble as any other online community. Yeah. And therefore their data is
lower chakra response is potent because you get in there and fight. You get in the arena and you fight these idiots.
Absolutely.
Right. It's only, you know, pixels.
Yep.
Nobody's really getting hurt except their feelings. Yep. And, you know, if you're in a comment section, you're in the arena. And I think it's all right to go in there and duke it out.
Yep. And the one, yeah, exactly. And the one sort of point of advice I would make to people who want to get into the arena is that always remember that when you're debating someone on the internet, you're not doing it for the sake of the person you're debating. That person is not going to change their minds. This has been shown. Debates entrench your view. Right, they don't change your view. However, you're debating, again, not for the sake of them. You're debating for the sake of everyone else who's reading that thread. Right. Right? So that's why you have to keep things civil. You have to keep things reasonable. You know, because if you're going to change minds, that's where you're going to change your mind is in the onlookers. And it's also critical for us when we do disagree with someone. I mean, this is where, you know, sort of the principle of enfoldment is really critical. Figure out how you're disagreeing. Don't just write someone's view off because, let's say, they're coming from an amber altitude and that's just so beneath you that, you know, what we have to do is we have to learn how to separate the view from the values. And we need to include the values and negate the view. And this, I believe, only, you know, sort of that integral thinking, that integral wisdom gives us the capacity to do exactly that. Like, okay, I can clearly disagree with all this, you know, ethnocentric view that you're packing around this, you know, point you're trying to make. But how can I include that deeper point? What is that deeper point you're trying to make? How does that inform my view? And how could maybe my acknowledgement of that view help you shift just a little bit?
Beautiful, Corey. Yeah. No, it's sounds like somebody who's curious.
Yeah.
You know,
that's really what it all comes down to, right?
How can I, you know, fabulous.
Yep.
All right. Are we complete, perfect, and whole?
I think so. Maureen says, excellent points. Thanks. I particularly appreciate the reminder to seek first to understand, not to be understood. Well said, Maureen.
There's that whole St. Francis prayer or something, I think, you know, that is really so beautiful.
Yep. Yeah. Well, thank you, Jeff. Awesome episode. A couple brief announcements. Be sure to tune in tomorrow when we are going to have Miriam Martineau to talk about integral parenting. I'm really, really looking forward to that discussion. Her new parenting web course actually just begins today, I believe. So we're going to be getting into that with her. And then this Saturday, well, I don't want to give you the short shrift, Jeff. We're also going to be doing episodes of Daily Evolver on Wednesday and on Thursday, just like we're doing every single week, Monday through Thursday. I hope you can join us every day. Next Saturday, Ken Wilber is going to be doing a webinar. I don't have the time in front of me right now. I think it's going to be around 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. Mountain Time, where he's going to be looking at his contributions, his keynote presentation for the What Now conference at the end of the year. And I think he's going to be talking about sex.
Oh, my God.
So there's a reason to tune in.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Cool.
Little
And
Wilbur
if I may
Thompson.
say something, join Integral Life, for God's sakes. Become a member of Integral Life. It's $100 a year, and it is the best $100 you could spend. Maybe, I don't know. But you decide.
No, it is. It is
Yeah.
absolutely the best.
Yeah. All right. We good?
I think we're good, man. Thank you.
All right, Corey. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. See you tomorrow.
Bye now.